Welcome to our last session for today at the second Democratizing Nova Summit. This is our plenary discussion with some of our wonderful community leaders joining us today, although we're all leaders in this movement and these efforts. But in this plenary session, we really wanted to bring together some folks who have really valuable perspective in terms of different sectors that we're representing, different communities, and being able to really speak to the moment is, what we're sort of here to do today. We'll have some brief introduction. We'll have some introductory comments about community wealth building. We'll hear from Stephanie and Nairuti, and then I'll have a couple of questions to pose to our panelists, and then I'll open things up to everybody else, and hopefully we'll end things on a conversational note. To get started, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists here today, and thank you all for joining us. It was really just very generous of you to come and lend us your time and your wisdom. And and lastly, the name of our discussion today is Community Wealth Building and the Changing Realities of Our Region. So, as I've mentioned before, we all know the parameters and the stakes of the changes that are happening in our country and how those national changes impact the DMV in particular area or in particular ways, and then finally impact Northern Virginia in particular ways. But at the same time, we know that this crisis is not necessarily new, or there are many elements of it that are not new. Many of them are a culmination of problems that we've been seeing percolating nationally, internationally, locally for a long time. So today we're going to take a chance to address them. And our wonderful panelists are, I'll start with June Prakash. And sorry, I don't have folks sitting in order. So we have June, if you'd raise your hand. June is a very experienced educator. She's a community leader and a professional with over 2 decades of experience living and working in Arlington, Virginia. June is currently a candidate for the Arlington School Board. She earned her master's in arts and forensic psychology from Marymount University, so that's right here in Arlington, in 2004. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology from the University of Connecticut, which she got in 1994. And she's currently pursuing a master's degree in education. Outside of the classroom, June has been elected twice by her colleagues as the Arlington Education Association, and she's been president there since 2022. So and while she's been president, the Arlington Education Association has secured the most comprehensive contracts for Virginia educators in 47 years. So we've made some really, she served as the PTA president at Ashland Elementary and is a dedicated supporter of local education initiatives. She's very proud to call Arlington home and is deeply committed to its schools and its residents. So thank you, June, for being here. Next, we have Johanna Garay. And Johanna is a daughter of El Salvadorian and Nicaraguan immigrants. She was born and raised in Arlington County. She works as an education support professional, specifically in preschool and as a preschool special education assistant in Arlington County Public Schools. For the last 3 years, she's been working with a nonprofit organization, SECOSOL, Seedbed of the Solidarity Economy, and that's Semillero de Economía Solidaria, right?
In
yeah.
Spanish.
Yeah. And through this work, she has been supporting immigrant women in making worker-owned home cleaning services in the DMV, particularly with the cooperative Mujeres Manos a la Obra, who operate in the DMV. And her hope is to empower and educate her Latinx community on social justice issues and bringing livelihoods that are dignified and democratic through a solidarity economy lens. She wears many hats because of her experience in Northern Virginia as a first-generation American, an educator and community organizer, and she is also a proud member of the Arlington Education Association. Let's see. Great. Next, we have Stephanie McHenry. Stephanie was kind enough to join us all the way from Cleveland. She's a part of the, she's the chief executive officer of the Democracy Collaborative, which is a 20-year-old think and do tank that works to turn community wealth building into visions and models that demonstrate new principles for a democratic economy, operating within planetary boundaries. She while also helping lay pathways for systemic transformation. She helped set up demonstration projects in community wealth building in several cities around the United States. Prior to her role at TDC, Stephanie was Vice President of Policy, Advocacy, and Strategic Initiatives for Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, which is a nonprofit that provides low-interest loans to important projects that remake city blocks and offers technical assistance to community groups. And from March 2011 to January 2019, she served as the Chief Financial Officer and Senior Vice President for Business Affairs and Finance at Cleveland State University. And I think, sorry, I'm getting my pages mixed up now. Prior to joining CSU, Ms. McHenry served as the president of the Urban Partnership Bank in the Cleveland region, and she's served in many other leadership roles at places like the Shorebank Corporation, and where she served as the president for 7 years, and she's been on multiple boards in Greater Cleveland, and she went to Dartmouth College and has a BA there in economics. So thank you for joining us, Stephanie. Yay. And next we have Yolonda Earl-Thompson. Yolanda was raised in Detroit. She enjoys using her interpersonal communication skills to create successful outcomes for families and communities. She has over 25 years of experience in community development. She's led many community initiatives for systemic change and addressing social and racial inequality. In 2019, she was recognized by Fairfax County's Neighborhood Community Services for her community efforts. Yolonda serves as the executive director of LAZERA Ministries, where her mission is to provide human-centered programs and services that educate and bring bring restoration to community members during times of hardship and despair. The organization provides programs, free healing programs, and safe space for marginalized communities. Her ability to move from inspiration to implementation has been celebrated on the channel ABC7. Yolanda has a BA in communications from George Washington University, an MA in family and marriage counseling from Liberty University, and she's a veteran of the United States Marine Corps.
Hoorah!
Yolanda lives in Alexandria with her husband of 20 years and her 2 sons.
21 this year.
Yeah. And finally, let me introduce Nairudi Shastri, whose bio I have here in my phone. Nairudi was born and raised in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and she's a proud descendant of care workers and revolutionaries who fought for Indian independence in the early to mid 20th century. In this spirit, this is the spirit that informs her work as a researcher, an educator, and a practical radical. In the beginning of 2025, Nairudi joined the Center for Economic Democracy as the organization's inaugural Director of Policy and Research. Prior to CED, Nairudi spent 8 years as a movement operative supporting anchor institutions to realize their potential, driving national narrative change campaigns, organizing resource holders and holding them to account, accelerating community wealth building activity, and much more. She holds a BA in sociology, French and Francophone studies. I did not know that. And public health from the College of William and Mary, and she has an MBA from the Lyft Economy. Nairudi dreams of a world where community is at the heart of our political, economic, and social systems. Welcome, Nairudi. Thank you. Okay, so getting started into our plenary discussion today, I've asked Stephanie and Nairudi to spend a few minutes, we say 5 minutes or so, on community wealth building and just tell everybody here a little bit more what this term means. Folks have heard it a lot today. It's probably new to a lot of folks today. I'm still learning about community wealth building myself, so I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. And I'm gonna pass the microphone. Oh yeah, we got a microphone. Okay. And I believe Stephanie has some slides to show us for a few moments.
I do. Look, here we go. How many panelists does it take to turn on the mic? Okay, I think we got it. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be with you today. I'm going to drive through these really fast just to give you a sense of what community wealth building is. And then say, go to our website if you want to know more, all right? So go into the next slide. There are 5 pillars. My short description is community wealth building is a strategy by which the people who help create value, the people in communities that help create value, get to keep more of it. So how does that work? There are 5 pillars that we focus on, and ideally there's a place that implements all of these. Realistically, there are places that start with 1 or 2 that they're strong at and move on to the rest as they can. Number 1, progressive procurement, meaning doing things to try to have large organizations like anchor institutions buy more locally. You heard a bit about that earlier. Number 2, just use of land and property, meaning that instead of the person with the most capital, meaning the most money, and by the way, we know why they have the most money, but rather than have them make total determination about how land and property is used, there's a lens for what's best for the community. So should this be in a land trust, for example, that maintains low-income housing, as an example. Number 3, locally rooted finance. As you heard, Shore Bank is in my background, which is the nation's first modern community development corporation, meaning that the financing available to do projects that support the community comes from the community. It is very focused on what's needed there. Number 4, inclusive and democratic enterprises. What does that mean? Worker-owned companies, cooperatives, like we've been talking about all day today. So it's not just the person that happened to risk the most capital that owns it, but in fact people that are helping to make those enterprises successful. And then number 5, fair work, meaning that even if you're not a worker owner, you certainly are working in an environment where you're properly compensated and have some autonomy about what your workplace looks like. So those are the 5 pillars. Again, go to the website, you'll learn more. So moving to the next slide, just to give an example, one of the things that we've done is to create a community of practice. Again, as I said, and as I often say, if you see one community wealth building strategy, you've seen one community wealth building strategy because they're very much tailored to whatever the local strengths are. There are about 15 communities represented in that community of practice. You'll get the slides if you'd like to see where they are, but they range from LA and Seattle to Atlanta to Cleveland to Baltimore. So each of these come together and they share practices, so hopefully they can avoid some of the mistakes and learn from each other. On the next slide, just to give an example of what were the inspirations for them. So in Atlanta, the real inspiration there in a nutshell was recognition of the wealth disparity between black folks and white folks. So in their particular practice is very focused on in-depth research to justify and to show where the needs and opportunities are. Moving to the next slide, if you look at St. Louis, they really came into being, We Power came into being after the murder of the young man in Ferguson, Missouri, right? So that's shown a big light on the violence and the injustice that black folks were experiencing there. So their initiative is much more around entrepreneurial support. Going to the next slide, in LA, again, there was a recognition of wealth disparity among the races, and they're really focused on systems like food and education. The United Way is in the middle of this one, which is really interesting, because how many people ever got asked to contribute to United Way at work, right? But it was usually for a food bank or some sort of direct support of the symptoms of poverty. Now United Way is starting to look at the systems that create poverty, and LA is really doing a lot of work in that direction. And then Seattle, on the next slide, again, racial wealth gap was a motivation, and there, it's equitable use of land and creating democratic ownership opportunities. So I'm going to leave that in a nutshell as to what CWB is. And Nairuti, I don't know if you want to add any more to that. She worked very directly with the communities of practice. I'm going to pass it back to you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephanie, for such a helpful introduction. I think the only thing that I would add, just to bring the point home, I was thinking earlier today, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance has a really great activity that you can go through as part of their Wellbeing Economy Policy Design Framework, which is a free course, 9 sessions that you can take online. And one of the activities I remember doing as part of the course was, they just make a list of all of the ways in which you negotiated your needs today. How were you fed? When you turned on the faucet to brush your teeth this morning, where was that water coming from? Things like that. And then they have you map that alongside different dimensions of our economy from which we source those needs. Is it from the private sector? Is it from the public sector? Is it from the nonprofit sector? Is it from what we call the commons? So is it something that really doesn't exist within the quote unquote formal economy, but it's still a way that we sort of meet and negotiate our needs? And I remember going through that exercise and realizing that 90% of the needs that I negotiate on a day-to-day basis are negotiated with the private sector, from healthcare to food, to putting gas in my car, all of those things. And I'm sure many of you noticed that today when you were, coming here and we were eating such delicious lunches and all of that. And so what community wealth building does is really tries to renegotiate the access to those services, but also the ownership of those particular assets that govern our economy. So we talk specifically about 3 key economic assets that Stephanie alluded to, but we're talking about land, labor, and capital. And if you look back at the 5 pillars, you'll notice that fair work and inclusive and democratic enterprise really talk about collective ownership and governance of labor. Just use of land and property speaks directly to land. And then for capital, when we talk about locally rooted finance, we're talking about, again, as Stephanie was alluding to, recirculating capital to be anchored in local communities. and then leveraging anchor institutions through the pillar of progressive procurement, once again, to democratize the ownership of capital. So I just wanted to share that my perspective now is shaped by the Center for Economic Democracy, and we often talk about when you're democratizing an economy, like what does that really look like? And it's about both the collective ownership and co-governance of, again, land, labor, and capital. So just another way to think about the 5 pillars to help bring that home.
Fabulous. Oh no, is that working now? Yeah, there it goes. Great. So bringing it back to the present moment, the present place, I want to talk to our panelists about what are the challenges confronting Northern Virginia right now. And I want to acknowledge that the focus of this summit is community wealth building and community wealth building as a range of solutions. But I also want to acknowledge that the range of problems that we're talking about and confronting in the moment are much broader, right? So the economy is very critical, and often we talk about the economy, we mean more than finance. We mean more than even our material needs. So I want to take things back a little bit and think more broadly about what are some of the critical issues that we're facing today, whether that's in the realm of the economy or not. So I'm going to start with Yolonda. Yolonda, what do you see as some of the critical challenges facing Northern Virginia's communities?
Hello. I really feel like anytime we're talking about community wealth building, of course, we're also understanding that something has been preventing that. And because of that, there's a lack of trust in community. So you could come up with all of these wonderful ideas and all of this access, but if you are not making sure that there's trust and healing in the very community members that you want to co-own and you want to let lead these type of efforts, then it can't happen. And so I think what is really a challenge is we have done a lot of great work of building trust, and in one moment that trust can just be wiped away because of a system that is still in place that will make people flee back into their homes. And so whether that be an administration or whether that be a pandemic or whatever that is, we have to fix these systems to help keep our community out and active. And so to me, one of the biggest risks is death. And not only just the physical death, we heard about the life expectancy, I deal with that, but also the death of hope, the death of trust, the death of belief. We used to be a country that really ran on faith and beliefs and camaraderie and all of that stuff, whether it was fabricated for some of us, it was still something that we held true. And we had a beacon of light for even marginalized people to be able to say, I can one day be the president. But with the current situation, a lot of hope and trust is being killed off. And so to me, that is the biggest risk, because as we talk about all of this, if the human beings in which you're trying to engage do not trust and do not really feel seen and heard, then you risk all of this wonderful work being for naught.
I'm actually going to go. I'm going to go to June, and then we'll hear from Johanna, and then you guys can chime in.
Thanks. So I'm going in a little bit different direction. Well, I agree with you, but I focused more on really specific points that I thought were specific to Northern Virginia right now. So I think the federal workforce reductions is one challenge right now. In Fairfax County, federal positions constitute about 6% of the workforce, so that's triple the national average. That's pretty significant. And as of early April 2025, approximately 1,300 federal employees and contractors have filed for unemployment. Again, that's pretty significant. Labor shortages and hiring costs, another one. So despite the low unemployment rate of 2.6 as of November 2024, we do face significant labor shortages in Northern Virginia with only 47 available workers for every 100 open positions. This scarcity drives up labor costs and hampers employers' ability to hire and retain qualified talent. Third one, and I only have 5, so don't worry, it's not 100. I thought a lot about this. Skills mismatch and workforce development. So employers are reporting difficulties in finding candidates with the necessary skills, particularly in sectors like technology and healthcare. While some businesses are investing in workforce development and training programs, the adoption of work-based learning approaches remains limited. And then number 4, so not A1 as our Secretary of Education would say, but our impact of artificial intelligence, AI. So the integration of AI into businesses is growing with uses ranging from automatic basic tasks to essential business processes. However, less than half of these businesses in the region have adopted AI, indicating a gap in leveraging technology to enhance productivity and address labor shortages. And then the last one are the economic ripple effects, which we can't ignore those either. So with the combination of federal job cuts, labor shortages, high rising costs, there are broader implications. Local services, including childcare and public safety, may be experiencing staffing challenges, and the overall economic absorptive capacity of the region is strained. So those are my thoughts on that.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. So, I think about things in more like community centered. As an educator, I think about my students and their families, think about my school community, the things that I've been hearing from those around me. And when Yolonda said she's worried about death, I think about how in my school community, which is 50% Hispanic, we have this amazing friendship party, which is like it's the event of the year. And our bilingual parents who PTA chapter, that's a huge, time for them to raise money for things like even our teacher appreciation things and all of these beautiful things that they do. And I recently heard that they are fearful to gather in a space together. I mean, even with feelings of like, even if the school were to say we will have security, we will have these things, right? And so, just thinking about, this hateful rhetoric that we're hearing, and wanting to help my community, and wanting to help my community to not feel scared, to come out and show up and to advocate for themselves. We're at a place where even I'm fearful to tell them that, and so, it's like thinking about like, how can we all work together to support, the people who feel like they can't show up for that. Like, we have to show up. As a daughter of immigrants, I do feel like I have that obligation to show up. I don't have fear of, this is my home. Like, this is where, like, I was born in this country, right? But my dad crossed the border in the 70s. My mom came here also, and it's one of those things where we have to support each other. Because the reasons my parents came is still the same reasons my students' families came, to provide a better life for their children. And I think what the whole working class of America wants. So I think that's a huge thinking about how can we, well, I guess one thing that I say, it's like we have no choice but to be radical. Because the system that's in place is not made for us, it's not working. So I think one of those things is, how can we not be in silos and come together to support one another?
So even though I was born in Gujarat, I moved here with my parents in 2001. My mom was a direct beneficiary of the H-1B visa program, which provides job opportunities for highly educated South Asians, namely who were coming here to work in the sort of tech corridor of the Dulles sort of metropolitan area. And since then, what I have noticed, having grown up here, moved away for a while, and having moved back, is that the economic and political footprint of Washington, D.C. is such that it almost masks Northern Virginia into being, as Eleanor was speaking to this morning, as like, oh, it's just this transient place that people come to work and then they move out, or every 4 years there's like as a new administration comes in, there's kind of this upheaval. And I actually think that is not the lived experience of folks who have lived here for several decades. And I think it's because there's actually two Northern Virginias. There's one that is predominantly white, very wealthy, has access to some of those resources that we spoke to earlier, and access to generational wealth. And then there's a second Northern Virginia that, as Johanna was speaking to, is often in service of the first, whether we want to be or not. And it looks like a completely different demographic structure and setup, and then ownership and governance in those communities looks very different. And I think seeing kind of how things have unfolded really since the pandemic, there is an opportunity for us to kind of make sense of that bifurcated reality and bring folks together in a way that really does create a Northern Virginia for all people. And I think one thing that's been impressive about democratizing NOVA and some of the work that's happening here at Mason through the Next System Studies program is really looking at the tech sector and thinking about the ways in which it shapes all of these different elements in our economic system. I live in Ashburn, Virginia, so we're the home of all of these data centers that we see popping up, so land looks really different. Labor, of course, is obviously a huge kind of shaping element of tech, and then also, capital. Tech brings in a lot of capital. Folks have referred to Northern Virginia as like the next Silicon Valley, and I'm kind of like, I don't want to live in Nova, that's the next Silicon Valley. And so all this to say, there is this bifurcated reality, and there's a real opportunity for folks to kind of merge some of those things together through community wealth building and analogous processes.
There's so much wisdom here. Stephanie, did you want to add a few things or talk a little?
Just a couple quick things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
First of all, I would not dare come into your town and tell you what the problems are in your town. So I'm not going to go too deep into specifics, but I wanted to bring a couple big picture things, follow up on some of what June said. What happens with unemployment, housing crisis, right? Credit crisis. We were talking about all those student loans, right? What if people aren't working? Now we got a banking crisis. Inflation, because with tariffs and the other uncertainty around regulation, that's going to impact all of us. So generally, I think that these are things that will impact your area. But the biggest one, I would say, is more of a 30,000-foot issue, which is that the horrors, and I do mean horrors, of the impact of these things on people's lives. I mean, I think about a baby being hungry, and it brings tears to my eyes, right? But even that horror cannot be allowed to drown out the systemic change that we need to make sure that we don't ever get our society into this position again. That's where most of us are trying to work, and it's going to be difficult to keep people's attention on those big picture changes that need to happen while this horror is happening on the ground. But we have to be steadfast and make sure that we do both of those things.
That is a wonderful segue into my next question, and I think we'll kind of, if I don't know if folks mind, we'll do kind of the same sequence again, and then I'd like to transition to audience questions, and hear from you all. My question is, what kinds of community power and community wealth are necessary to meet this moment? So that's really broad. That's a really hard question. That's a question that I'm coming with here today genuinely. I'm like, what kind of community power can get us through this period? And by this period, I mean, there's the short term, and then there's a bit longer term. And then there's, I think, also, really long term, meaning the crisis of our society and the kind, it's obvious that the kind of society that we now live in is not working, and we're all here because we sense that on some level, and there's a shift in consciousness, and I think it's happening all over the world. So what are the kinds of power that we need to build to see the other side of that, where we're living in a way where we're honoring the 7-generation principle, right, where the things we do today are for the benefit of people 7 generations down the line. So I'll put that that question back to Yolonda. What kinds of community power and community wealth do you see as really critical to meet the moment?
I have to take a deep breath on that. But I think one is that we have to share the power. And that means that you also have to understand that community already has power. I do not like the word empower, because that implies that you are giving them power when they are already fully capable of moving in full power if you remove some of the barriers and the marginalization and the jacked up systems that are keeping them from being able to move in power. So the first thing I think is freedom. Freedom to move within my own power without judgment. So if I walk in a room and I got a baby in a stroller and a baby on my hip, and you don't see a husband nearby, you don't just assume that I'm a single mama struggling, but you see this is a parent that cares enough to show up even without child care, and I need to make sure that I am creating a space where she or he can move in power. And so how do I make sure that there's child care next time so that she or he can fully show up in all of their power and all of their intellect and all of their capabilities when you got to, because someone was supporting you, because maybe you have an affluent job or you have a village that is surrounding you. So we have to make sure that we are creating safe spaces where people can move in their complete power. And then share your power with them, so when you hear someone scream out and yell out, you could say, I want you to come with me to this next meeting and share that same thing. And then prepare the people at the meeting. Don't let her show up or him show up and you all haven't prepared them for this very authentic person like me that's gonna show up unapologetically Black, female, from Detroit, and you just gonna have to shift your room. Because I'm moving in all the power, because I know that I got something that can change my community, because I'm already doing it. And so I think that shared power, creating these free spaces. And the last one is validating teen voices. These are your next generation. And we have to make sure that teenagers feel like they can move within all of these systems with the freedom and autonomy. We have parents that have not given up autonomy, and therefore we have systems that haven't. But yet, as someone who is trained in parenting, that's all we preach to parents, especially parents that's been mandated by the system. They tell me that they have to move in autonomy, give them the freedom, no corporal punishment and all of this. And it's like, but you doing corporal punishment. So let youth have a voice and let them move in full power.
So two things came to mind with bullet points underneath them, of course. So community power and building voice and influence, and what that would look, and I'm going to remove the word empower, so thank you for that reminder, is involving residents to co-create policy, particularly around schools and housing, transit, workforce development. Expanding access to participatory budgeting, where residents help decide how local funds are spent rather than a few deciding what's best for many. Ensuring multilingual outreach. The second one is organizing and coalition building, so supporting grassroots groups in their advocacy in equity, climate justice, labor rights, et cetera. Bridging gaps between longtime residents and newer or transient residents, I think is important. Engaging senior students and gig workers in the advocacy coalitions, and then leadership developments. So investing in leadership pipelines for residents historically excluded from decision making. And so I had written BIPOC women and working class people, but now would like to add teens to that list as well. So thank you again for that. And then encouraging community-based organizations to mentor and support civic leaders from within. And then in terms of community wealth, my thoughts were rooting prosperity locally, right? So support for worker-owned, which we talk a lot about today, and community-owned enterprises, shared ownership, anchor institution strategies, which is something we talked a lot about today too, so I won't go like really into that, other to say then, you know, large local employers, like Arlington Public Schools, county government, hiring and sourcing locally, right? Building contracts with minority and women-owned businesses and workforce training tied to community needs. Affordable housing and displacement tools is one, such as like tenant protections, support for down payments, things like that. And then public infrastructure resilience. So investing in broadband access, green energy, libraries, not just as services, but economic equalizers. And always ensuring that public projects hire locally and pay fair wages. And then meeting the moment, what does that look like? I think deep listening, part of what we're doing here, listening, understanding, redistributing that power and the resources, and shifting from short-term to long-term collective ownership and sustainability. Thank you.
So, you know, a lot of from the spaces that I've been in, like this last month, and like where I work. Oh, hi, sorry. So in a lot of the spaces that I've been in, you know, one of the things that I've been learning is that even at, like, I need to really know my local, like, area where I am, like, where I'm trying to do the community work. Like, you need to understand, like, your cities, your state, but I think even more like your cities, right? Like even talking about your school board and those type of things, and understanding that sometimes you have to build these relationships with these people who have leadership on your school boards, on your city boards, and those type of things, just so that they can start listening to what you're trying to, like what you're asking for, right? And, you know, some people have, you know, some other people that I know doing work, you know, they've told me sometimes these issues aren't just Republican or Democrat. Sometimes you get more help from a Republican than a Democrat. And I think that's kind of been a little bit eye-opening for me, you know, in these recent times. And I think, you know, when you talk about like affordable housing, a lot of projects or groups that are organizing in that realm specifically, you know, they are getting the people together. They're getting out there and they're doing great work, but those things are being, as much as like they're pushing the needle, they get shut down really quickly as well. And so understanding that like building relationships is really important. And then specifically just talking about working, for me, working with the Latino community, working with people who do not have Social Security numbers, is also, if I want to show them, like, you can actually make a difference, I do need to come from a place that is culturally appropriate to them. You know, I cannot, you know, if sometimes like academia is just like a little too high up in the higher stratosphere, you know, to know, like we have to bring it down to, you know, to like what is our present reality. And I think creating those spaces where people feel like, oh, you understand like where I'm coming from, you understand, you know, just, and I guess speaking specifically to Latinos, right, our indigenous roots, right, where a lot of these solidarity economy ideas we have been doing for hundreds of years. And so, and also just, you know, people of color, like we've been doing this too, to protect ourselves, because we are always marginalized and put in these boxes and being told, no, you're not allowed. So I think those are the things that I think are really important in building community power, and remembering to just meet people just meet people like exactly for who they are, you know, and not just, oh, like this is like kind of transactional. No, this is a relationship that we're trying to build, and we're working together for all of our own, like for each other's livelihoods.
All right, +1 to everything that has been said. I just want to really quickly just share that and speaking to June, what you were sharing earlier around co-governance, one of the key bodies of work that we lead at the Democracy Collaborative is about co-governance and how do we expand practices of co-governance, particularly during a time where much of the ways that our social movements and community-based organizations are funded happen alongside electoral cycles. So you'll see a boom right before an election, and then you'll see a bust, and then another boom, and another bust. And what that means is that we don't have longevity in the kinds of power building that we're doing in our communities. So co-governance, examples like participatory budgeting, like citizen assemblies, like all sorts of other tactics, can be really helpful in maintaining that across the board. So that's just one thing I wanted to +1 and also just share from our perspective. The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about, so 2 weeks ago, I was in California with a group of 32 other Asian American organizers. And it was a first training hosted by Momentum, which several of you might be familiar with, but is a generations-long kind of organizing training institute. And then 18 Million Rising, which is sort of the preeminent Asian American advocacy org here in the US. And we were having really incredible conversations around what does contesting for power and wealth actually look like? And in order for us to really ground in the sobering reality that is 2025, we actually talked very concretely about what is the right doing that has led them to be so successful in 2025 and over the past few decades. And, you know, and what can we learn from some of those strategies? And there was a young person, to your point, Yolanda, from Chicago, who's the same age as my younger sisters, and we ended up being roommates at this training. And she brought up this really thoughtful point, which I've been chewing on for the past couple of weeks, which was, as the left, we actually contest for power in very different ways than the right. And the outcomes of that contestation also look very different, because we're trying to build a broad coalition that is multiracial, interclass, and across many different generations. And so that got me to thinking, like, okay, if we're contesting things differently, but still learning from some of the strategies that have proven to be politically and economically successful over the past, 4 decades, then what are we doing differently? And one of the kind of learnings that came out of this program was that, the right may have power over our legal system, power over our financial system, power over our political system, but they don't have power in numbers in the ways that we do. Truly, no matter what the election results looked like, that had a lot more to do with a lack of co-governance and keeping folks engaged and all sorts of other things, but we do have people power. And what that means is in those systems, whether it's political systems, economic systems, and financial systems, legal systems, how do we infuse some of that ethos into how we operate across all of those sectors? So if we're looking at finance, for example, corporate banks are not the only answer for how we can govern capital. We can, for example, look at community banks, we can look at community development financial institutions, public banking, community investment vehicles like community investment funds. We can look at kind of mobilizing resources, pooled funds, we can look at community philanthropy. All this to say that there are things we can learn from the right, but I think the ethos of how we contest for power is different, which I actually think makes us more powerful in the ways in which we negotiate for a more democratic economy, legal system, and political system. Thank you.
That's great. I would just add one thing in terms of what the community needs in this moment. And I think what the community needs to do is to insist on courage. Insist on courage.
Yes.
And I think about that in three different places with examples right here in this room. For example, we need to insist on courage from our anchor institutions like universities, right? We heard this morning that, for some years and hours that Dr. Cook will never get back from his life, but he did get Georgetown to put money in the Rosies, right?
That's right.
He insisted that they have courage, right? Same thing, with Dr. Mansky here. Insist on courage of supporting something that's really looking at system change and how we gird that in academia and other places. So insist on it from anchor institutions. Insist on courage from our political leadership, right? Courage to look at how economic development can be done in a different way. So it's not just chasing the next Amazon plant to get located in your community. That's traditional economic development, right?
Yes.
What about the courage to say, how can we as politicians get behind locally rooted enterprises that, like the Evergreen Commercial Laundry in Cleveland, that can do the same thing, hire more people, have worker cooperatives, etc. But that takes courage to say we're not going to do it the same way we've done it for the last 100 years, right? And finally, courage from philanthropy.
Yes.
Courage from philanthropy. I was just at a conference of Black philanthropy professionals, and I love this. This one woman said, philanthropists need to quit walking around with a question mark and start walking around with the exclamation point that they have the ability to have.
That's right.
They got the money. You know who can't stop them from doing the money, right? So should not be walking around with a question mark. Again, with Dr. Cook, our good partner, the Washington community found, I know you had to do a couple extra dances, but you got them, right?
That's right.
You got them. So I think courage is what we have to insist on in this moment, in the places that have power to do something about it.
I love this panel. It's fantastic. We have a half an hour. I'm going to open it up to folks to share your questions. I would say if you could just briefly introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and so, assuming you have one, because we're all just here as we are, right? And I'll also ask if folks could keep their questions brief, because we want to hear from a couple of folks. We do have a half an hour, which is great. I'll probably stop us like 5 to 7 minutes before the half an hour's up, so I can give our wonderful panelists a chance to have a few words as we close. And I will walk around with a microphone. quick show of hands. Who has a question? I see Scott. I see Charlotte. I see a couple of folks. Okay, we're here on the right. So I see one of our folks is a student. So I'm gonna do progressive. Okay, I see. Progressive stack really quick. Do we want to take a couple of questions? Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna do 3, going from right to left. And if I ask you to hurry up, it's nothing personal. All right. There you go.
Hello?
You got shouted to.
Okay, yeah. Hi, I'm Hanan. I'm an undergrad at Mason, and I'm a Next System Fellow with this program. My question was, if I'm in an area where I feel like there's not a lot of opportunities for me to get involved in community wealth organizing or building, what's like the first step that I can take or encourage people around me to take to start building up that basis?
I love that question. If I think you took the first step today by coming here, number 1, but if there's not an opportunity, make it. Yeah. You know, I think there's a saying that says, if there's not a seat at the table, bring your own chair. And that's what you need to do.
This is excellent point. And as someone who led the community of wealth building, community of practice for a little while, something that we've noticed about communities across the US is that community wealth building activity is happening everywhere, even if it's not called that. So if you understand the principles of community wealth building, which you can find on the Democracy Collaborative website, they were co-created by our community of practice, and you understand sort of the ethics of those 5 pillars, you can actually find pockets of activity. And as someone who is a student, I think the most important role you can play, and as a representative of an institution like this, is to be a connector and a weaver across all of those things. A really practical resource is if you go to the Democracy Collaborative website and click on Community Wealth Building, there is an action guide that takes folks like you and other community members through a sort of landscape scan and analysis to understand what are the pockets of activity, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and gives you some really concrete steps for how you can get started. So another resource to just bookmark.
I didn't want to answer it. I just was letting you know. I mean, I don't mind answering it, but I think 2 is enough. I think, yeah.
Are you sure?
No, yeah.
Okay.
I just was like, no, I can't. I'm moving in my power. Like, I'm not going to be able to retain all that information. So.
Yeah. And lastly, I just want to add that, you know, tomorrow we have a really rich set of like I keep on saying panel discussions, but I'm misspeaking. They're workshops. And they're going to be working sessions. So that's what, you know, a lot of what tomorrow is going to be all about is like answering really concretely, like, okay, like what's our next step collectively, and how can we help folks plug in and get on board? Okay. Scott.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Scott. I'm an upcoming PhD student here at GMU. A real quick +1, love the point about courage. A phrase I like is, courage is not the absence of fear, it is the action despite it. Love that, right? And then my question is, because I think, you know, off of this action question, how can we instill in people a belief that the actions they're taking matter? Because I think a lot of people feel defeated right now and can't see the results of what they're doing. So that's my question.
I can do a really short one. I think that's why I'm so focused on having demonstration projects at the, you know, coming through, because when people can see it on the street somewhere else, it doesn't feel so foreign. Yeah. So I think to the degree that we can all, you know, shed light on those things that are accessible, that helps.
I think also investing in courageous people so that they can do peer-to-peer support. So I am able to activate a lot of my community because I see them, and I also see my old self. So I see the fear or the imposter syndrome or the lack of whatever that in my community, and then I go, girl, look, I was just like you. I've been there. I promise you, you can. You know, they're like, oh, Miss Yolanda, I wish I could be like you. Girl, you are me. And so, look, we're going to do this thing together. And so I think making sure that there's an investment, and I'll just shout that out to Ms. Ramona. Ms. Ramona invested in me, and therefore I'm able to invest in others, and then they invest in others. And so when you make that investment, but by just saying, I see you, and I want you to continue to be you, because everything about you matters in changing this system, then they go, look, you don't have to change. You literally can show up just like me. I ain't changed, I ain't did nothing different. I get to activate and be myself. So invest in encouraging authentic people being able to show up authentically, and they will pass that on. And now you have a ripple effect that generates masses of people.
Yeah, that's right. Is this on? Yeah, great. Show of hands, raise them high. There were a few more. I thought there was one on this side. It looks like there isn't. I'm going to go with Charlotte right here in the front.
Yep, I'm Charlotte, pronouns she, her. Thank you. I'm here just from DSA. I remember you talked about like our younger voices, but also like about community death. And as someone from like a rural background, like at least my generation, our earliest memories are around the recession. We were like 12 when Donald Trump was elected the first time, and I feel like that community death feels like it's already happened. And I think one of the most important things right now is like finding a way to get young people to like imagine in like community struggle again. And what are some ways you'd recommend, especially reaching out to young people right now?
Charlotte, thank you. Because I work, my children are that. And that is one reason why I do what I do. Because adults, this is my mama being a mama. 3 years ago, I'm sitting in the basement with 6 teenagers that were 10th grade. Their freshman year was taken away from them through a pandemic. They were the ones who had to see their parents going through all of the trauma of change and feeling hopeless, feeling powerless. And what I did was I said, no, you all are going to be the adults in a couple of years. And so I invested in them. And I took those 7 young black men and said, you are our future. And I brought in someone to teach them social innovation with my money. I ain't had no grant. And they started a program called that, and they learned how to market. I gave them all of the skills, and so they just renamed it because I named it something that adults would name, and they was like, Miss Yolanda, we don't even understand what Mbutu Asa mean. What is that? And they named it the One Brotherhood because they felt like they had created a brotherhood. But the most important part that I put in there was mental health development, because our children are dying. And they're dying these very quiet deaths of self-sufficiency and self-awareness and self-determination because the adults around them are fighting for their own just survival. And so we are killing our children by having so many unhealthy adults around them who are having conversations that aren't changing anything. So we have to empower our teens to do and be the change that they want to see. The other day when there was a stabbing at the school, these now 30 plus, it went from 7 to now 30 plus black African American males that said, we need to create a healing space, because now they understand leadership is also associated with healing. Because they understand their generation needs to be healed from all of the unhealthy ignorant as adults that have been running this country. And we have to tell them, part of your new leadership is to first heal from that death. Resurrect yourself. That's why we call ourselves LAZERA. It's when things feel like a dead situation, hope can be resurrected through healing conversations and connection and engagement. Charlotte, I'm here for you. And whatever you need, I will be a partner with you to resurrect the hope, the dreams in your community.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Yolanda. Yes, yes, and we need that. And because, you know, the communities we're working with, like, we're real people. You know, it's not just data and statistics and research and, you know, thousands of years of practice that have been, you know, come down. Like, these are real, we're real people, and we're real communities. And, you know, and I think, and I don't personally work with I don't work with teenagers, like making a youth, like, you know, like Yolanda does. But we do, like with SECOSOL, we do have a, well, it's a co-op that we do partner with, Nova Web Development. And there are a lot of interns that are in high school, at a tech high school. And, you know, and as we are going through our work, we have given them the tools to know, you know, why it's important to own your own co-op. To give them the autonomy of, like, you can make decisions, and to treat you like an equal. Like, just because I'm an adult and you are a senior in high school doesn't mean that we can't work together and we can't learn from each other. And, you know, I've seen a lot of brilliance in these interns that some days I'm so astonished with all the work that they do. And I think to myself, when I was 17, when I was 16, I was not learning how to do taxes, how to start my own worker co-op, how to do decidim, like, you know, all of these concepts, you know. But I think that's the one thing, is to treat young people as equals.
All right, we've got about 15 minutes left, and we had a few more questions. I'm going to start over here on the far left, actually, and then we can kind of go in. Sorry to the camera. You guys good? It's on.
Okay. So my name is Joel. I am a senior at Wakefield High School in Arlington, and I guess I'm associated with the Arlington AMP.
Wow.
Yeah. So I do have a question. In today's world, there's so many things, like, even if we give people freedom to use their power, people have so much on their minds. How do we get people to, how do we grab their attention and get them to focus on issue and make some real change? That makes sense.
Can you say a little more?
Yeah, so at least an example I would see is that, like, as a high schooler, I know it's very hard to get high schoolers' attentions. I mean, why would I care about the bus routes if I have millions of papers due, grades, college stuff? This also applies to, like you said, single parents. Why should they care about their community when they got bills to pay, their kids are hungry, or, you know, their door is broken? You know what I mean? Like, there's millions of things grabbing our attention. How do we get people to focus to get some solutions, not just focus on the symptoms?
The first thing I did was create a space that feels safe and supportive. So and of course you all heard in my bio, I do family and marriage therapy. Therapy is like my background. So first off, I also know that the first thing that is preventing you from seeing it is that there's a blockage because there's trauma or there's just a lack of empathy that has been. So emotional intelligence has to be the first thing. It's like helping you to build up these empathic ways of seeing, but first heal whatever is blocking you from seeing someone else and having that compassion. So I bring in mental health practices and emotional intelligence training to help my young men to get past saying, well, as there's a narrative, right? Like, I ain't gonna look out with them. They trying to kill me. They trying to lock me up. They could stay focused on that, but I'm like, wait a minute. But let's just develop some emotional intelligence, so then you can see that part of humanity is helping one another. And that's how we're gonna grow and how you're gonna become a man, because you gotta take care of, but you also have to be a protector. And then the second is then exposing. Exposure is key to dreaming dreams and to actually shifting mindsets. So when I take them to a beach house in Hugh, Virginia, and it has an indoor pool and all of these things and a beach, and they've never been to a beach and they've never watched the sunset and they've never done a lot of these. I do a lot of firsts. They went to their first this, they first that, they first this. And then they go, okay, Miss Yolonda, what else you got to offer? And I go, you want to go to a CSB meeting with me? Because they looking for a youth council and they want to create prevention and no youth are at the table. And they go, well, what does that mean? I'm like, well, to kind of make sure that you don't fall into the pits that are out there with drugs and unhealthy behaviors and things like that. Oh, okay, yeah, take us to there. Where we going out there? I'm gonna take you to McDonald's. We're gonna go to Chipotle. We're gonna go laser tag. I'm still gonna meet you as a team. So all of my teams, they showing up to meetings because Miss Yolonda, first off, I'm gonna let them play that rap music. Like I be in there, like I be turned up. I'm listening to trap music and stuff. And so I'm meeting them where they are. So the space doesn't feel like an adult space. It's their space because it is. And so then when Miss Yolonda wants to drop a nugget, not a whole plate. The teens don't want a whole plate of issues. They just need a nugget. And so when I get them a little nugget and some dipping sauce, then they go, okay, all right, yeah. And then they go to a CSB meeting and the adults are blown away and they start continuing to talk. So our last CSB meeting, the teens talked 90% of the time and created solutions.
Yeah, I think it starts with you. I mean, you lobbed it up here, I'm gonna lob it right back to you, right? Because I think with anyone, whether it's young people or those of us who aren't so young, we must meet people where they are. So your peers are already looking at something, probably online, that's the way it works now. But how do you influence what people see? Seeing is truly believing. I mean, everybody from the show me state now, everybody from Missouri, like, you can talk all day long, but you gotta show me something.
Just a quick thing that I'm gonna share is, thank you, is I feel like we do need to take advantage of this moment. It does feel, it's very dark, I can't even read headlines anymore without getting angry, or just like, if I want to have a good day, I'm just not going to even see anything, right? But I think people are starting to make a shift because now people are waking up. Democrats, liberals, all of us, because for democracy, it's a continuous fight. It doesn't stop just because you get Joe Biden in office. Oh.
There's a stone statue in DC that says that is carved into it. Democracy requires constant vigilance.
Exactly. And I think that's people right now. I have been hearing people, my neighbors, my friends, my coworkers, they're ready to fight and go and show up to the school board to protect LGBTQ plus students. They're ready to go to the school board to fight for library assistant positions that are being cut in half. You know, so people, we need to take advantage of this moment, that even if, you know, yes, there needs to be healing, there needs to be an attention to mental health, but people are now saying, hey, I don't want to shop at these corporations anymore. I don't want to go to Target. I don't want to go to Walmart. You know, I want to invest in places that are, you know, bringing economic wealth to my community, within my community. So, you know, I think we should have, that's the hope that we should carry in our hearts as we continue to do this work, is that, you know, even though what we see in the media is dark sometimes, you know, people are ready to show up. You know, just like even in my community, people are asking, like, where can I get my local butcher shop? Instead of going to the Giant. Like that, I mean, that's a small thing that people don't think about, but they're investing their money to a locally owned business. So, you know, I think like this work does start with ourselves to also shift in our brains, you know, what is convenient? We're so used to convenience. And we need to say, hey, I would rather go to Rosie's Grocery than the Aldi even, or the Giant. And so I think we have to get ready to be uncomfortable.
This is making me think, so one of the projects that I worked on a few years ago was called Beloved Economies, and it was a national narrative change campaign, really thinking about work, both its practice and the social institution, and really thinking about it as an entry point to get to greater levels of economic change. And if there's anything I learned from that experience, you know, speaking to your earlier question about imagination, right, is that the stories that we tell about our lived experiences really matter. And here's an example. Back in like the 90s, there was this overwhelming narrative that girls are bad at math. I remember going to elementary school, and that was always in the back of my mind, like, I'm bad at math. So even though I was a senior, I was in calculus BC, I remember like being in study groups with boys and always thinking like, I'm shitty at math, so like this isn't really a space for me, even though I was in that class. And then I go into college, and now when you look at the STEAM and STEM workforce, who is making up that workforce? And so to me, it starts with a story. And so if all the stories that we're hearing right now about our economy is that it's extractive, it's that it's bullying people, it's that it's keeping people down, it's keeping people unable to participate in our communities, we need to tell a different story. And so as young people, I really think it is important that y'all are investing in telling those alternative stories, because you're experiencing them every single day and you know what's wrong. And so tell us a different story. And this is just something, I say this to anybody I've supervised, students I've worked with, which is like, if you're gonna oppose something, you better come with me, with a propose to me. Because I don't wanna hear about what shit isn't working, because I've heard that. What is working, and let's tell stories about that.
This is so wonderful. I'm sure we could go all evening, but unfortunately, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to give our panelists a moment to share their parting words. For everyone here, I want to encourage folks, if you have lingering questions from this conversation, channel that straight into tomorrow. You know, a bunch of us, we're getting up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed tomorrow morning. Bring these questions with you. We'll answer them together. And, you know, hold the questions that we've asked here in this discussion to, like, let's use this to inform what we do next. And I'm just so thrilled for that. The last thing, just a little abuse of facilitator privileges. I want to say in sort of questions of like youth is like, I got involved in activism when I was, you know, pretty, actually the first stuff I was going to, I was like a really young teenager, like 14, 15, big protests. And when I think about those experiences, like, well, why did I show up? Like, it was fun. And so I think a lot of what we have to make this fun. We have to make this our like joy. And I think for a lot of us right now, we feel like this is our life raft, you know, like why are we here on a Saturday? Because we want to be, and because this is giving, you know, it's filling our cups. And so I think that we should really be holding on to that, you know, like, let's make this fun, let's make this interesting. And for youth, yeah, like I think Yolanda, like in your work, it's making the attention to detail and making spaces comfortable for youth is really critical. They're not, you know, they're not details, right? Making people comfortable in their own skin is, you know, it's not an afterthought. It's essential. And then the last thing, you know, on the piece about storytelling, also when I think back to, you know, when I was much younger, what brought me to the table and what kept me going was hearing from folks who are a bit older than me about what they were doing when they were young. And when I hear folks today talk about how like hopeless sometimes things seem, one of the reasons it breaks my heart is because young people are usually the ones like, I'm trying to say this without using an expletive, like young people are, you know, often the ones like breaking barriers, making change, leading the charge, you know? And so part of why it's so heartbreaking is it's like, oh man, like you guys should be like, forget all those old fogies, like we're gonna, you know, do things in a totally different way. So I think part of what we need to be doing is sharing stories about how young people have been the ones to drive change. And like that there's, you know, I often talk to people who don't know that, you know, things like the Battle of Seattle took place, 25 years ago now, that there, that there've been major upheavals that have been led by youth. But at the same time, it's definitely a trap to say, oh, well, the youth are going to do it for us, right? I think that's been in the zeitgeist. That's been a detrimental story, is that, oh, well, youth will be the ones to fix all of the problems, right? And that's like, I see my Gen Z, friends are like sick of being told, like, okay, so we're going to fix climate change. No, we're gonna fix it together. So thank you for letting me take up a few minutes. Oh no, I took 5 minutes. All right, we're gonna take a few minutes. I'm actually gonna go the opposite way this time, and we'll say just a few minutes, some parting thoughts.
Okay, I'd like to go last. So I'm just
gonna... Yeah. Okay, we're gonna start.
Yeah, from Yolanda.
We'll start from Yolanda. Yeah.
I guess I would say, I thought we were going the other way, so I thought I had more time to think. And I had so many things racing through my head. So I'm just going to let my heart speak for a moment and activate that heart. So I apologize, because this is how I am. Making sure that youth are protected and respected is important, because there's a conditioning. I come from Detroit, where I moved quite differently as a young person, because the community looked like me, it felt like me, the power looked like me, felt like me. And raising my children in Northern Virginia, I have been very frustrated with the conditioning of Black people, and I'm speaking from my perspective. And there's a lot of conditioning of marginalized children in these systems. And we have to make sure that we're creating other spaces so that they can access their own culture and their own likeness and their own history and their own stories, so that they can have value. And when they see themselves moving in power, then they will start moving in power. And I'll say, because this one young man who's one of our founding members, someone knew he was on a founding member and had a picture from when he had met John Lewis in elementary school. And she sent it to me and was like, please share this with him. And I shared it with him, and he's at VSU and thinking about dropping out and not really moving forward. And I said, do you know that you are John Lewis' legacy? And he was like, who is that? And I said, here's a letter you wrote to him saying that you were gonna fulfill this. And I had to educate him. But the reason why he didn't remember is because he was being bused to an institution that didn't see him and used him as a prop for this engagement. And as a prop for this engagement, he didn't retain the moment. Stop using our children as props and use them for the purpose. Let them move in their power, and then you will have purpose-driven futures from people who are moving as the human beings they are and not as prompts. The last thing I'll say is I teach parents, stop seeing your child as possession. That is not your child. That is a human being that is at the age of 1, 5, 7, 10. And they have full human capabilities, full autonomy, and if you could read your child instead of write on top of it, you will have a better human moving in these spaces.
Your heart's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Let it flow. Well, first, I really want to thank Dr. Mansky and the whole Next System team here at GMU, and Eleanor, and we spent some time in the woods, and Dr. Cook, and it's a longer story, but it was a good time, and it won't show up on the news, so everything was all right. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we're all together, we're all doing this work together. Just a few takeaways for community wealth building, just to remind you, people in communities that create value should have more of it, period. Number 2, strategies have to leverage local strength. When you've seen one community wealth building initiative, you've seen one community wealth building initiative. So feel free to innovate based on your local strengths and needs. Solutions have to make sense from every viewpoint, whether you're the one implementing and creating, or you're the one who's going to be necessary to make it all work. It has to make sense all the way up and down. And then start somewhere and build, right? You may not have all 5 pillars day one, but start somewhere and build. And then just a philosophy to paraphrase one of my favorite scriptures. We must always do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly.
So again, thanks for the opportunity and the invite today. I really appreciate it. And I also kind of selfishly want to say, if I dash out of here and don't talk to you, please don't take it personally. I have a meet and greet at 6, which requires a wardrobe change. So I'm going to be like running out of here. But also just keep in mind that we're going to get through this uncomfortable time with community. And you don't have to do everything, but just do something and be the kind of community member that you would like to see on a bigger scale. Say hi to someone. Put your freaking grocery cart back. Don't leave it in the parking lot. Pick up a piece of litter that you didn't drop. We can all do one thing to make this a better place and a better world. You don't have to be screaming from the rooftops. Just do something.
Yes, so thank you, Eleanor. Thank you to the whole DNOVA team, who I've learned so much from and has given me this opportunity. I just want to say that we need to be rooted in community care. We need to humanize the communities we're working in. And just keep our eyes on working collectively instead of working in our own lanes, because that's where our power is.
All right, I know I'm what stands between you and going home or grabbing a drink, so I'll just share that when I was at this training in California, one of the things we talked about is like, how do we make our movements more fun again? And we talked about the long legacy of movement art, specifically movement song. And all 33 of us Asian comrades left, making a commitment to bring more song back into making the revolution irresistible, as they say. So I thought we would end on a little song, if that's okay. If folks would stand up if you'd like to, if that feels comfortable. So it's just going to be a call and response. I'll start. Bring your best singing pipes. You don't have to be a good singer, you just have to know how to sing. All right, here we go. Let the life I lead, let the life I lead, speak for me, speak for me. Let the life I lead, speak for me, speak for me. When I get to the end of the road, when I get to the end of the road, and I lay down my heavy load, and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I lead, speak for me, speak for me. Thank you very much.